did you want to get to this right now? I think we should. Let's get to it. Because you, me, and Grady went out for lunch yesterday, and you said I got a take about the Dallas Stars roster construction and how it relates to the Vancouver Canucks and what they can learn about theirs. Explain.
Yeah, so essentially, with Dallas coming into town, I was sort of thinking about Dallas's evolution as a team, right? Because if you look at the end of the 2021-22 season, Dallas was sort of this fringe playoff team that nobody was talking about as an actual cup contender. They've really leveled up and taken that next step where everybody now looks at them as one of the best teams in the Western Conference. They obviously made the Western Conference final last year. And as a starting point and as a template for the Canucks situation, I think there are some similarities in terms of roster composition and even cap situation, right? Because you look at the Stars 2 years ago, they had an elite defenseman to build around with Miro Heiskanen, but the rest of their blue line was definitely lackluster and kind of still is. One of the best first lines in the NHL with Hintz, Robertson, Pavelski, but they were essentially a sort of one line offensive team, just didn't have enough difference makers beyond that. Stud young goalie and Jake Ottinger. And the key here is that you didn't love their cap situation because they had Tyler Seguin as their highest forward, making nearly $10 million, and Jamie Bennett 9.5, who was underperforming his contract. So it's like you had a couple of cap obstacles to work around as well. And I remember 2 years ago looking at the Stars and sort of thinking, man, how are they going to take that next step? Like, are they forever stuck in this sort of purgatory of being good enough to make the playoffs, but not quite good enough to actually sort of contend for a cup? And before I get into sort of what we can learn, I'm just kind of curious do you see the similarities there in terms of like as a starting point with the Canucks' sort of base pieces when you mention like Pedersen, Hughes, Demko, a couple of non-ideal contracts on the Canucks' books?
Well, when you talk about Pedersen, Demko, Hughes, I think you were talking about the best forward, defense, and goaltending combination in the entire league. Like, Colorado comes close, but I don't trust their goalie as much as I trust Thatcher Demko, and just I don't think as highly of Georgiev as I do Thatcher Demko. So when you look at it from that perspective, I think yeah, the Canucks have the best starting point, but that's what they've had for years now, right? Like it's not like these guys just came to Vancouver. They've been here for a few years now. So it is about building around it, and it is about navigating those troublesome contracts that you have on your books. So yes, I see the similarities. The thing I wonder, Harmon, is, and I know you have more on this, so I'll let you kind of get back to it, but you did an exercise at the Athletic, I think it was a year or 2 years ago, where you examined how far the Canucks really are from being in that contending status in terms of their roster composition. I'm curious just to get your thoughts of what do they need now to get to that spot?
Well, and this is where obviously the blue line stands as
Sure.
another sort of crucial area, finding a real 3C, maybe another impact top six forward. It's not that they need a lot of pieces, but this is a challenge that I've been trying to explain. It's that how do you find those pieces and fit them under the cap, A, and B, acquire them when you don't have a ton of sort of trade assets to necessarily work with, and you don't have, let's say, like a deep prospect pipeline that you can just trade away blue chip prospects and not really sort of care about. And this is where the similarity with Dallas sort of stands out to me, because obviously they had the coaching change, Peter DeBoer coming in, which made a huge difference. Their best players sort of took another step up, which we're kind of seeing in Vancouver this season as well. But to me, how they fit those difference makers under the cap was they hit on their first round picks,
Mhm.
right? The last couple of years, we've started to see Wyatt Johnson come in as a middle six center. He was a 23rd overall pick, and then Thomas Harley in the playoffs came in as a top four defenseman, and that changed the dynamic of that team because it wasn't just Johnson coming in and he's scoring 24 goals as a rookie, but now all of a sudden it lifted up Jamie Benn, and it's like you've got two sort of new players almost in a
Mhm.
way when you consider how much of a breakout Ben had last year. And so you think, okay, what does that mean from Vancouver's perspective? It's like when you look at Tom Willander, for instance, if within the next couple of years, 2, 3 years, he can step in and be a difference maker on this blue line, especially when it's Vancouver's biggest area of need,
Mhm.
and do it on an ELC, like that's a type of thing that could like change your roster, change your ceiling as a team.
And when we've had these conversations in years past where, we see them taking shortcuts. We see the Philip Hronek trade and we call it a shortcut, for example, right? That's the thing that we kept pointing out is you don't have enough and you don't have enough help coming on those ELCs because that's the thing that's very common with almost every cup contender is they've got those players on those ELCs, those really high-end difference makers. And this is something Botch talked about a lot, right? Was when Pettersson was on their ELC, the Canucks' inability to contend during Pettersson's ELC, that's bad. Like that was very bad, a very bad position for the Canucks to be in. There, look, it's the past is the past, but they need those ELC difference makers. So you look at a guy like even Hunter Brustevich, who's right now is leading the OHL in points. We've been seeing his development right before our eyes. Look, I don't know if he's coming into the NHL next year per se, but you know, you've got Willander, you've got Brustevich, you've got Arshdeep Bains, who right now is leading the AHL in points. Like you're starting to see this development where this was a weakness of this organization in the past was their development. And yeah, their prospect pipeline isn't phenomenal by any means. Like they don't really have those high end difference makers. Maybe Willander can become one. Maybe Brustevich can also become one. But
Karamaki.
Karamaki, exactly. Karamaki also, I think, third in the SHL right now in goals. These guys taking the next step and developing and coming in on ELCs, that's what's not only going to make the Canucks good now, but also in the future. Like you need to keep these guys coming if you're the Vancouver Canucks.
And it's not just as supporting pieces, right? It's as and this is where let's say a guy like Arshdeep Bains, while I love what he's doing and I think he can absolutely help in an NHL role this season, because he's 22, because he's an older prospect, I don't think anybody's sort of expecting him to sort of come in and be like a definitive core player, right? And that's where you're more so concentrated and focused on your absolute cream of the crop top prospects, which again comes down to Willander and Karamaki, especially because you know in a couple of years, Canucks are going to have a couple of wingers when you look at Kuzmenko, when you look at Besser with expiring contracts, and those guys make money, and it helps to sort of if you have another young right wing goal scorer coming in who it's like this guy can come in and potentially supplement that, and you can reallocate cap dollars to upgrading the blue line or finding a legit 3C. Like those are the things that can be real game changers. And I know this is more of a big picture conversation than necessarily a conversation about the team this season. But it was just interesting and sort of came to my mind when Dallas came in, just because I think that's the closest template for, okay, the ultimate goal isn't just making the playoffs in terms of the big picture. It's we want to see this team contend for a cup. I think Dallas coming into town was my reminder that, okay, this might be the closest template for the Canucks situation and what can they learn in terms of taking that next step.